Trendsetters. Got me on the mic now, let's spill the tea. Talking courtside dreams from history. Legends on the blacktop now and then. From Wilt to Steph, we hit it again. Mo better chimes in, let's go deep. Young bloods rising, can't skip a beat. Puppy prospects with fire in their eyes. Draft night suckers and hoop dream highs. Wire to wire, bring the heat. Broadcast magic can't be beat. Do better, we're go better. Or who cares? Trendsetters.
What is poppin', y'all? It is your boy, Guard E3, and welcome back to the And One podcast. But, before we get started, gotta introduce you to the crew. Ladies and gentlemen, he's somebody that I call the greatest co-host of all time. He is Mo Better. How you doing, Mo?
I'm doing great. Fabulous Thursday night. We're getting ready to talk some hoops. We're getting ready to talk greatest players of the 90s. How can I not be more hyped? Getting ready to get into it with you and chopping it up. Let's go.
Oh, absolutely. So, we all know how we get this started. And for anybody just tuning in live, either here or on TikTok, we always start out with an underrated player of the week. Somebody that either A, we ain't thinking of today, that's going under the radar, or B, gets lost in time in the past. So, Mo, do you want to start us off? Who is your underrated player of the week?
I think my underrated player of the week this particular week, I'm gonna have some fun. This is gonna be appreciated a lot by Phoenix Suns fans and Miami Heat fans. The guy that I'm thinking about that gets lost in time, very tough physical defender, could shoot with range. Talking about Thunder Dan Marley. Dan Marley was also an underrated athlete. Take it to the hole, could bang on you. Guard multiple positions. He definitely fit what they would call Heat culture when he went from the Suns to Miami. I think Dan Marley is a vastly underrated two-way player who gets lost in time.
Hey, no, fair enough. I always hate when you see the graphics of, this is who MJ played, and they'll show a picture. It always seems to be either Dan Marley or Jeff Hornacek. I'm like, dude,
isn't that right? Why do you pick on those guys?
Right, leave them alone. They are actually just insanely talented basketball players. You know what? I'm going to use mine on Jeff Hornacek. If we're talking about the 90s, let's stick with the 90s point guard, Utah Jazz. I think you were telling me before the show, I didn't even realize this, third most points among point guards in the 90s.
Yeah.
15,000 career points. He was a bucket. And he was a lot better than people give him credit for. So, give me Jeff Hornacek.
Underrated guy, combo guard, could play the point, play the two. Right. In the 90s, they rank him as a two guard. He is the fifth highest ranked scoring two guard in the 90s, scoring well over 12,000 points. Shooting 49% from the field, 40% from three. Jeff Hornacek was a bucket. I get how he's not the most physically imposing player, but even today, here we are in 2025, one of the best players in the history of basketball, one of the best players in terms of their impact on the league and how he's changed the game, is Steph Curry. And the one thing Steph Curry isn't, he's not physically imposing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You don't go man, I gotta be at least 6'7", 6'8" to be no, you don't. And you don't have to be stronger than Charles Oakley to be Steph Curry. I'm just saying that you really can't judge a book by its cover, because I know when Steph was coming out, I knew he would be good. I did. If you're asking me, I thought, Mo, you knew Steph was going to be a superstar coming out of Davidson. I did not. I'm going to be honest. I thought Steph Curry was going to be pretty good. I thought he was going to make a couple of all-star teams here and there. He has gone well beyond what I thought he would be. I'm just impressed. Now we're talking about him as a transcendent player, and he's earned that. But I digress. The point is, let's not sleep on how good a player guys like Dan Marley and Jeff Hornacek were.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. And, Steph Curry did change the game. He gave, players something that they can almost aspire to be that's realistic. I see people go, well, why don't more people try to play like Bron? I'm like, are you naturally 6'7", 250? That would be me like, well, why don't more players play like Giannis? Like, are you 7 foot? Like 250? Like, Steph laid down the blueprint just for a lot of these up and coming players because it's just a realistic kind of play style for them. But
he's given hope, Brett. What Steph has done is he's given hope to the guy that's in the gym that's a pretty good shooter, but not the greatest athlete, that if you keep working at it, you might end up being the most valuable player on that court.
So, speaking of Steph Curry, Mo, I've heard this a couple times. He apparently ruined the NBA. Everybody's taking too many threes. Ratings are down. It's all doom and gloom for the NBA, apparently. I figure we can go back and forth with this one. I'll start off with you, Mo. Why do you think less people are watching the NBA?
I think it's not any one particular reason. So I think the NBA is not easily as accessible as football is or as baseball is. Baseball's always been more of a regional sport. Maybe that's why you can watch it on TV a lot more. The NBA needs to find a way to reconnect with its fan base, and they need to make the game that people do love to watch still more accessible. What most people are doing is, like, you've heard the phrase "cut the cords." Well, most people, if you don't have a cable package or an NBA package, and you just have basic cable or something like that, you don't have nearly as much access to be able to watch NBA basketball. So I think that's part of it. And I think the NBA, and I'm being real, I think the NBA, starting with Adam Silver and his crew, I think they've done a really poor job of marketing the up and coming stars in the NBA. Like they're leaning in to the guys that are getting ready to go leave the league, Brett. They're leaning into LeBron and Steph and KD and Chris. By the way, all transcendent, all incredibly great players, but they're on the other side of their prime. Even though they're all still incredibly productive and play at high level, I love that about them. But you should be highlighting guys like SGA, Joker more, Giannis more, even Donovan Mitchell, who has totally impressed me with what he's been able to do on both sides of the floor this year. Those kind of guys, they need to highlight more instead of like constantly like by default making everything about the old guard. The old guard's getting ready to leave, and if you keep putting the light on the old guard and not caking up for your young stars, I think that's the problem. I think Adam Silver has not done the best job of really putting a light on the up and coming stars. That's what I think. I think it is a combination of things. But to say that the 3-point shot alone is the main reason the NBA's ratings might be down, that's not true. And really, if you look at the history of their ratings over the last decade, they've been good. But the funny thing is, they've never been better than they were in the 90s. I don't know why that is, but that's a fact. They just aren't. They never were. And that might be marketing. It could be a lot of things, but it's not the fact that Steph Curry did something that nobody else could do, then suddenly other guys wanted to do it. And by the way, every franchise, Brett, and you know this, they don't just have trainers and assistant coaches. They have analytical guys on their staffs now. And almost every analytic guy will tell you that shooting the three, if you go by the numbers, is much better than shooting an 18-foot-2 or a 16-foot-2. And while I do think the analytics have merit, if I'm a basketball coach and my point guard is in the middle of the court on a 3-on-1 break, I don't want both of my wings to run to the 3-point line. One of them can, but one of them needs to keep running to the basket to get a dunk or a layup or a lob. I think the analytics are right to a degree, but they're wrong in another sense. Every wide open shot from three isn't a good shot because most guys actually aren't good 3-point shooters. You know what I mean? Like, it's a good shot for Steph and it's a good shot for Dame. It might be a good shot for Donovan Mitchell or Klay Thompson, or you know what I mean? But the truth of the matter is there are a lot of guys in the NBA that are wide open from three that shoot threes that shouldn't be taking any threes. And I think that does hurt the game. coaches and their analytical staffs tell guys, if you're wide open, if you get a chance for an open three, you shoot the three. If I'm a head coach and I know you can't shoot the three, I don't give a damn if your ass is wide open or not. Don't shoot the three. Pass the ball or drive to the basket, but don't shoot the three.
Yeah, I also think that thank you, by the way, Kyle, for Alex and joining in. Kyle said they need to stop crying about style of play, create new storylines that aren't all wrapped around LeBron. I can't put that on Adam Silver. That's NBA media. And Alex wants a more physical game.
I think the solution is between what Alex and Kyle just said. Although I do think some of that is on Adam Silver because he's been a players commissioner. And ultimately, he's the HNIC when it comes to everything that goes down in the NBA. But Kyle is right. Why do you make everything about someone who, even though he's an all-time great, even though he's a Mount Rushmore player, he's not the best player in basketball right now. He's not. And that's not a negative thing. We are talking about a guy that's been in the league 20 years, but the best player in basketball are the guys that people think shine a bigger light on Giannis and Joker and SGA. Shine a light, like I said, on guys that are, to me, are having career years in terms of leadership and what they're doing with their teammates, like a Donovan Mitchell. Shine a light on the fact that, to me, Cat has been everything the Knicks thought he would be when they made that trade. He's been everything they thought he would be. Shine a light on the fact that even though Anthony Edwards and the Timberwolves are kind of struggling, he's still one of the up-and-coming stars in the NBA. Like, you can do that. You can make better storylines by focusing on something other than KD, Steph, LeBron, wash, rinse, repeat over and over again. You have to let that go because you've got up-and-coming players that you need to be shining a light on, need to be giving their flowers.
Let's see. He says, shine a light on the Rockets. Fair enough. Also, people's attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. Maybe shorten the shot clock, get more. I don't think shortening the shot clock would work as well as we think.
Oh, I think the numbers would be worse.
I think that's just going to that's just going to lead to more like isolation basketball. I just think another big issue too, like you talked about the game not being accessible. So a lot of the times what people can see is what they see on social media, and what's really the biggest things that draw. Not only it's like LeBron, but it's really just bashing the game. Like you can throw a well-designed play on social media, like 5 views, 1 like, but if you throw like a low light on there, that's blowing up.
Yeah,
so
that's facts.
Yeah, I definitely think that there is an issue with also too, just kind of like the NBA fan base in general in sharing the game, because they're so quick to jump on the negative, but they're not so quick to show the positive. And I think that's something you kind of got to improve also.
There's a big disconnect. Oh, by the way, just FYI, Kyle, we've been talking about the Rockets a lot this year. But what I would say to you and anybody else who's been following and been watching the Rockets, they got some dogs and they get after you. They just outwork most teams. But I want to point out the most obvious. You're not going to go on a deep playoff run when your 3 leading scorers shoot below 40% from the field, shoot below 34% from 3. As good as they've been, if I point out that really obvious fact, and it's weird. I'm talking about their 3 leading scorers, even Şengün, who's a terrific big man, but ultimately he only shoots 45% from the field, which isn't really that great a percentage because it's not like he shoots a lot of threes. He doesn't finish that well around the basket because he's really, as big as he is, he's a finesse player. I think Houston is terrific, but I think that their inefficiency in shooting in a playoff series against a very good team, it wouldn't shock me if they got swept. They're just very inconsistent offensively, and they're very inefficient. Like maybe one of your leading scorer is an inefficient shooter, but their 3 leading scorers are inefficient shooters. That is not a winning formula, and that's not a winning formula in the G League. It's just not going to happen.
No, that's fair. That's something because that's why it made sense as soon as they started saying about, well, they're interested in De'Aaron Fox. I was like, well, that actually just makes a ton of sense because he can provide some stability scoring the ball efficiently in the half court, and that's something that they desperately need. So overall, if obviously they're never going to say that they're moving De'Aaron Fox out loud, but yeah, if he does get moved, yeah, the Houston Rockets and the Orlando Magic, I think, are two teams that should jump right on that.
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question real quick, Brett, because that's a good sticking point. Mike Brown got fired. That's not a secret. Everybody knows that. But I want your take on this because I'm going to give my opinion, then I want your take. Mike Brown wasn't the reason the Sacramento Kings were what they were. What I tried to point out to people is every team has a ceiling. And people act like because the Kings made the playoffs 2 years ago, they were getting ready to be some dominant team in the West. And I was like, that was with De'Aaron Fox playing his very best basketball. Sabonis playing his very best basketball. And they were the 7th seed. They weren't like a dominant team. And they didn't go on a deep playoff run. That is what you call a blip, ladies and gentlemen. That's not a build-up to anything. They're not that talented. Their talent is vastly overrated. They're not that talented. I love De'Aaron Fox. I think you like De'Aaron Fox. Most people do. But when you look at De'Aaron Fox, as good as he is, I'm not talking about because we know he can score. I'm talking about being the best player on a team that goes to a finals. I don't think De'Aaron Fox can be your best player. He can be your leading scorer, but if he's your best player, you're not going anywhere near a finals. If Sabonis is your second best player, you're not going anywhere near the finals. They're miscast. Sabonis should be your third option. De'Aaron Fox should be your second option. The problem with the Kings is they've never had a bona fide franchise player superstar. I think De'Aaron Fox is phenomenal, but I think he's more all-star than superstar, flat out. And you can fire Mike Brown and you can bring in Doug Christie. What's not going to change is the ultimate result. The ultimate result is the Sacramento Kings are not going to make the playoffs this year, flat out. It's just not going to work. I'm sorry. I get frustrated with other fans that go, well, I don't understand because look at the right. You can look at his numbers, but the year that they made the playoffs, Brett, they were number 1 in pace. They were number 1 in offense. By the way, at the same time, I think they were damn near number 30 in defense. Well, they're like middle of the road in pace. They're like middle of the road in offense right now. And they're definitely at best middle of the road in defense. Their roster construction is flawed. It's not that great. You put a lot of money into a guy like Sabonis, who, by the way, can gobble up numbers left and right. But in a playoff series, is Sabonis ever a dominant player? No, he's not. I'm not trying to kill him, but let's keep it a buck. Sabonis is built for the regular season. The same way Julius Randle is built for the regular season. He's going to put up numbers. He's very good. But if he's one of your 2 best players, that's why your team's not a very good team. Period. Flat out. That people keep doing this. And look at the Wizards. They went out, gave Kuzma a ton of money, gave Jordan Poole a ton of money, thinking that Jordan Poole could be a centerpiece to a team. You want to know why bad franchises stay bad? Because they don't fire stupid people that give that kind of money out to a guy like Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma. Those are high-level role players. You could tell me that Jordan Poole is a 6th Man of the Year candidate every year in the league, and that would make sense. But when you try to make a role player into a centerpiece, there's a reason why your team lives in the lottery. We talk about the talent in this league all the time. What we don't talk about is, here's the thing. For every really good player that's in the current NBA, there are a lot. And I mean a lot. Guys that are not very good players, that are just bad players. There are a lot of really bad teams. Everybody's not a star. Certainly everybody's not a superstar. What's the running conversation, Brett, that you and I had not too long ago with the NFL genius Gene? What did Gene tell us? You guys are going to be eating your words because when the Sixers go on this 17-game win, remember that? 17-game, 18-game win streak. I don't know how long ago that was. Gene, we're still waiting. Still waiting on that 17-game win streak. I'm going to go a step further. The season is going to end, and we're still going to be waiting on that 17-game win streak.
Hey, what's up? Hey, what's up, Fritz? Thank you for checking us out, sir. But
all right, I went on a little bit of a rant. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I just want to shout out, the comments. I think you're right. I think the Sacramento Kings, because if you remember, Mo, before the season, they signed DeMar DeRozan, and I wasn't fully sold on it. I think that you can fire Mike Brown. You can bring in Phil Jackson, Tex Winners, Eric Spoelstra. It doesn't matter. You can bring them in on the same coaching staff. I don't think it matters. I think this Kings roster at the end of the day is too fundamentally flawed. And there's some attributes where I think Mike Brown did kind of goof up rotations a lot. Like he would just randomly change things on the fly. And I think there were problems with Mike Brown. But the reality, too, is what can he do when Kevin Huerter forgets how to shoot in an offseason? Keegan Murray and Kevin Huerter both are sub 30% shooters this year. There is no spacing on this team. And with what did they need before the offseason? We knew more shooting, but mainly wing depth defensively. They didn't have anybody on the wing.
Right.
And they bring in DeMar DeRozan, who can provide scoring. Isn't necessarily the same thing as shooting, though, and giving you the spacing that you need. And the thing with his kind of scoring, too, is he's going to slow the game down, which is the exact opposite of how they succeeded, like you mentioned, 2 years ago. So, really, this is something that we saw coming, and I think that firing Mike Brown, it's not getting you anywhere. It doesn't fix anything. I know you can go, they're 2-0 with Doug Christie.
I know.
Awesome.
I got Kings fans telling me, like, nope, we got rid of Mike Brown. We're about to turn this around. And I'm like, nope, you're in the honeymoon period with Doug Christie, which, by the way, I watched the game last night. It's not that the Kings played better. It's that the Sixers played god-awful in the fourth quarter. It was god-awful if you watch that game. Like, they just completely came apart at the seams. Look, I'm not telling you DeMar DeRozan can't help a team win. What I am telling you is I don't think he was ever a good fit for what the Kings do. When you want the best version of Sacramento, they have to play fast. They have to play fast because that you maximize what Sabonis, what Fox, what's the young man Malik Monk do best. When they play fast, when they get up and down the court, they're a completely different team offensively. The problem is, even when they're playing at their very best, playing fast, putting up numbers, they don't do much defensively. They never have. And it starts with your two best players. De'Aaron Fox, not a great defender. Sabonis can't stop anybody that can score. He's only good against centers that are rollers. Put him up against a center that has the offensive package, and Sabonis is going to get eaten alive. I would not be surprised. Maybe you would be, Brett. I'm going to ask you, would you be surprised if Sacramento thought De'Aaron as our best player, taking us as far as he could? Would we be better off moving him for a bunch of assets that could help us with the future?
Oh, let's see. Got to fire the coach first to light a fire under the players. If it continues to be bad, you need to make major changes. Yeah, it's so tough with that too, because that makes sense. It's just frustrating a little bit because, like, you knew you gave him a flawed roster. You gave him a hand grenade with the pin pull, then you're surprised it blew up. And to me, I'm just like, okay, this. And I think if you're going to fire Mike Brown, no question, off the top of my head, can't remember his name, I apologize, but the GM has to go too. The guy who really put this all together, he has to go.
Who's the GM in Sacramento? Is Vlade Divac part of that brain trust? Is he still part of that?
Monty McNair, that's his name.
Monty McNair. Look, I love that you pointed that out. The architect of this roster, you gonna fire the coach? At some point, he got to get fired, because let's keep it a buck. If and when they start going back to being what they've been all this year, what's the next step? You gonna fire Doug Christie too? Like you can keep firing coaches, but it's not going. What's going to have to make ultimately change is your roster construction. Your roster is led by two very good players. but they're not the type of players that's going to lead you on a finals run. It will never have, like, even in the best case scenario for Fox and Sabonis to go on a deep playoff runs as your 1 and 2, they would have to be in the Eastern Conference. And even in the Eastern Conference, I don't think they're going on a deep playoff run.
And like the thing too with Monty McNair is I think that Devin Carter has a bright future. The rookie they got, he's injured. But once again, you needed wing defense. So you pick up a 6'3" guard. I also think that they missed in the draft really bad with that one. I'm not saying Carter's not going to be good. I think he will be. I think he's a talented player. I just think that the Kings also didn't need another 6'3" guard when they already had Keon Ellis, who was a 6'3" guard, and it took them 30 games to figure out, hey, this kid can really play. Yeah, and this too. Jory mentioned it. Fritz mentioned it. The way they did this too. The fact you waited till after practice.
That's my thing.
He leaves. He's in the car after media. You fire him on a phone call?
No class. No class.
No, like, honestly, I know we have friends that are Kings fans, so I don't want, but they have everything that's coming to them from the beginning, the way they constructed free agency, the draft, and the way they fired Mike Brown. What happens next after this honeymoon phase is over? When they kind of go back to being bottom of the West, barely a play-in team, the Kings have it coming to them. They have nobody to blame but themselves.
And let me ask you this too. So let's say they don't trade De'Aaron Fox, you keep Fox. And you keep him because you've done the math. And you know that if you move a player like Fox, what's not going to happen? No top free agent is coming to Sacramento, right? It is not a destination place for the top players in the league. And so your only chance of getting better or doing a rebuild literally is through the draft.
Yeah, that's fair too. At the end of the day, I think Fox is gone too. I agree with Dante on this one. We got to remember too, Fox already declined an extension. He said he wanted to see where the franchise was headed.
No, he's doing a Dame. He's doing a Dame. He don't want to be the bad guy, but he wants out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Happy birthday. Mike Malone's speech on the Kings was absolutely fantastic because they were right. I'm at the end of the day, I can't wait to see what happens with the Kings. I can't wait to see where De'Aaron Fox ends up if he does get moved.
By the way, if you trade De'Aaron Fox, it should be a given. You're trading Sabonis too.
Not moved by a potential DeMar Sabonis duo making noise in the West.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say no. I'm with that. Right. If you trade De'Aaron Fox, you literally are going for the future. I'm talking about breaking everything up.
Oh yeah, no.
DeMar Sabonis out of here. Y'all got to go. Y'all got to go.
Yeah, you just go scorched earth at that point. You just have to get rid of everybody.
And guess what? On the right veteran team coming off the bench in the right role, I think DeMar DeRozan can still help a team win the basketball, just not as a starter. That's all.
Yeah, and I think he can help too. I just think you also need him on a slower paced team that needs scoring.
Like the Lakers.
Hey, they could have. Almost this close. Speaking with bad franchises, De'Aaron wants to leave with his reputation intact. Got to trade Fox. And completely agree with you. Completely agree with you, sir.
I do too.
Now, Doug McDermott's got to go. The only reason, by the way, I don't like DeMar DeRozan going to the bench is because then you're starting Doug McDermott and Jay Crowder, and at that point, you might as well start DeMar. But speaking of bad franchises, I saw an interesting question, Mo. Do the Phoenix Suns regret trading for Kevin Durant? I'm going to start with you because I think we might differ here.
Yeah, sure. I think most people would say no. I'm going to say yes because when you trade for Kevin Durant, the goal is to win titles. You're thinking you're upgrading. You're getting one of the transcendent players in the NBA, and your goal is to win titles. What I would point out to Phoenix is, as the best player on a basketball team, Kevin Durant is done winning titles. I'm not saying he can't help a team win titles, but he can't be your best player. And they brought him there not to be Book's sidekick. They brought him there to be better than Book. And I would say at a minimum, they're about dead even. But I don't think either one is going to carry you in a deep play. We said this. Did we not say this when this trade first happened? We said it looks pretty, it's shiny, it's definitely going to get them on TV. They're going to have a puncher's chance, but you know what's not going to happen? They ain't going to win no title. And guess what? They ain't going to win no title. So, no, they won't say it out loud, but I would regret making that move because you traded away your future to make that move. And you can say, well, Kevin Durant, he did what? He helped them get out of the first round. You could have got out the first round without Kevin Durant. What he hasn't done is help you go on a deep playoff run. And spoiler alert, Phoenix, for all the Suns fans out there, I hate to bring it to you, y'all ain't going on a deep playoff run this year if you make the playoffs.
So I can't show Fritz's comment yet because this is exactly, I'll put it up now because this is exactly where I'm going with. I don't think they regret the trade for Durant. The trade was too far with
Bradley. I knew you were going to say Bradley Beal. I'm not a fan.
I think that the Durant trade, because here's the big thing to me. They traded for Durant, but they still had assets. You still had a big contract in Ayton. You could have moved in a better deal. Chris Paul was on a big deal. You could have gotten better players. To me, I agree with Fritz 100%. It's not the Durant deal. It's the follow-up moves. I don't think the initial trade for Durant made them contenders yet, but I thought the follow-up was the most important thing.
Agreed.
DeAndre Ayton apparently could have gotten Miles Turner. Instead, they ended with Yusuf Nurkic, who has been absolutely terrible this year. He was great last year. He's fallen off a cliff. That trade looks awful.
Was he great? Was he really great? Like, if you look at Nurkic's numbers to compare to Ayton's numbers, I don't think he was great at all. Like, maybe he's a nicer guy. Maybe he's easier to get along with in the locker room. But on the court, he's not an upgrade. Where is he an upgrade at? He's not a good defender. He's a good rebounder. But, I mean, Nurkic is giving you like 12 points a game. This year, I think he's below 12 points a game. Like, the only way you can tell me that's an upgrade is if his contract is lower and that he must be a hell of a locker room guy. But in terms of what they do on the court, not an upgrade. Not an upgrade. I'm not even an Ayton fan, but Nurkic is not an upgrade.
No, I agree he's not an upgrade. I feel like he played – I think he played great last year compared to this year. I think that's where great came from me because last year, he stayed on the court for the most part. He was the most consistent player, like being out there in terms of all their start. Like he showed up at least. This year, he just hasn't shown up. Maybe that's a better way to phrase it.
That's a better way to. I like that.
And then CP3 trade. What'd they really get out of it? They got what? I think that's the trade that brought Grayson Allen in. So you turned your best and biggest contracts, and I'm not saying they were great contracts and very positive assets to look at, but you're telling me that you couldn't have done better. You had 6 picks because that's what you sent out for Bradley Beal,
right?
Or it was like 4 or 6 picks. You could have made a great package and gone for some higher end players. But you didn't. To me, the Kevin Durant trade wasn't the mistake. It's trading for Bradley Beal and swapping Ayton for Nurkic. As soon as they made those, you knew it was over.
And look, I'm not saying that you and Fritz's points aren't valid. I'm just going in another direction.
Yeah.
You did trade. You trade Cameron Johnson. You traded Mikal Bridges, who are both basically a whole decade younger than Kevin Durant. Now, obviously, I'm not saying either one of them nowhere near the player that Kevin Durant is, but sometimes you don't have to be a better player to be a better fit. They're younger. They're both better two-way players. They are. People keep talking about how great a defender KD is. He's not a great defender. He used to be a really good defender. You isolate him and you're going to cook him. He is stiff. That line that Pat Bev used, it applies to Kevin Durant. He's a cone. Can't guard nobody. He might come from the weak. He might come from the weak side and get a block, but if he's guarding a score in space, he getting eaten alive. It is a bad trade because you traded for a guy who was 34, thinking that, and I get it, they've got a new owner and he wanted to make a splash. You made a splash. I'm just going practical. If the goal is to win a title, the trade is a failure. That's all I'm saying. If the goal is to win a title, the trade's a failure. Because you could have kept Cam Johnson, could have kept Mikal Bridges with Booker, maybe not as explosive a team, but you would have been good enough to make the playoffs and do the same thing that this current old team is doing. Because once you brought in Bradley Beal, look, I hate to keep sounding like the guy that met Bradley Beal in a bar or something, but Bradley Beal is not a winning basketball player. He's not. We could do a whole show on guys that are talented but not winning basketball players. And you would start with Zach LaVine and you would end with Bradley Beal. They're just certain guys you're not going to win if they're one of your best players. As soon as they made that trade, doom.
The all-time example of that being Adrian Dantley.
Yes.
But our new viewer here, by the way, first time I'm seeing you in here. Thank you for tuning in, Young Goat. And thank you, Fritz, also for tuning in. We appreciate you guys. He has a question. Do you think the Cavs are a legit threat to make a deep playoff push, or are they just having a good regular season? What do you think, Mo?
I know initially I have a formula in my head that 25 games into any season, barring a major injury, you find out what you really are, right? Barring a major injury or a trade. And when I saw Cleveland not only sustain what they did early going, I'm impressed. Everybody else went out and made these big moves. All they did was opt for continuity. They brought back the same roster. I don't know if it was the coach's idea or Donovan Mitchell got with Darius Garland, but when he began to put Darius Garland out front and made him kind of share ownership of the team, a confident Darius Garland with Donovan Mitchell, they've got to be at a minimum, one of the top two backcourts in the league, right? They're that gifted. So to answer your question, do I think they're legit threats? I do. I really do. I now, do I think they're going to out and out win the East? I have no idea. I still think the Celtics are favorite, but the way the Cavs get after people defensively makes them tough. But more importantly, late in games in this NBA, shooting is important, yes, but you have to have guys who can break defenses down late in games when plays aren't working. The Cavs have two of those. They've got Mitchell and they've got Garland, and that makes them scary.
And not to mention, Evan Mobley has had a much improved offensive game. He's been a pretty solid. He's been a solid 3-point shooter, and he's been shown to be able to attack mismatches. So he's been awesome. I absolutely love it.
And Jared Allen, all he does, you can rim protection, rebounding, and you don't have to run plays for Jared Allen. He just gets his on pure work.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I agree. I think the Cavs are a legit threat to make a deep playoff 100%. Push. They have shown me that they can compete with anybody. And not only that, they're winning a heck of a lot of games. And a key part to me with seeing if a team's a legit playoff push, how do you look against good teams? You don't even need to necessarily win the game, but is your offense sustainable against good teams? And anytime I see the Cavs win or loss, their offense is very sustainable. So I think that continues, and their defense, I think that all continues, barring injury. This is a team that's going to make a deep run, and I'm here for it.
I am too. I have to admit, when you're wrong, the first question when everybody talking about look at the Cavs early in the season, I was like, yeah, pump the brakes. Let's see if they can sustain it. I'm sold. I'm all in. I think the Cavs are they are the scariest team in the East because in a lot of ways, they're still kind of the unknown.
By the way, Fritz, I appreciate you. Thank you for subscribing. Love it.
Appreciate you, Fritz. Good man. Good man.
So, yeah, they brought back the same roster and got a better coach than Kenny Atkinson. A lot of people don't know how good a coach. I agree. I was, before we got Doc Rivers, my Milwaukee Bucks, I've said it on here. I've said it in text. It doesn't matter. I said, I want Atkinson. That's who I want for this team. went I'm just going to say nicely a different direction, obviously, but yeah, I love Kenny Atkinson, and he showed how good he was when he was bringing like the pre-Kyrie and KD Nets team to the playoffs. That team had no business going to the playoffs,
Good point.
but Kenny is such a leader that he brought a team that had to bring in like 50-year-old Jamal Crawford in for the bubble
Right.
of the playoffs. So
Right. Good point.
my Knicks hope Cleveland our regular season. My Knicks hope when the game changes in the playoffs, they don't have stars to rise to the occasion in the playoffs. D. Mitch has shown that he does normally rise to the occasion.
Yeah, I think the only question mark with Cleveland is can Darius Garland rise the way Mitchell does? Because if Garland can do his part in the postseason, they're gonna be a tough out.
They aren't beating the Celtics because of one guy, Al Horford. You know what? That's absolutely fair. I agree with that one.
I love Al Horford.
Kenny Atkinson had D'Angelo Russell in the All-Star game. That's fair too. So, there's a lot of talk about, we're done with the 90s. But we're not. Here on the N1 podcast, we like to talk hoops, current and historical. So, we have one more topic, and then we're going to get into our All-NBA decade team from the 1990s. But before we get there, I do want to do a quick PSA because I saw an interesting tweet that people were trying to agree with. They said, which players in the NBA have zero flaws in their game? And people were actually naming players. Quick PSA, and I'm sure you agree with this, Mo. No player in the NBA, current or in history, has zero flaws in their game. Name a player, there's a flaw somewhere.
Yeah.
Some players it's just not as noticeable because they cover it up so well. But I think it's weird that, and I hope we're not trying to push the agenda of, oh, there's such thing as a flawless player. There's not. I promise you. No matter how good your best player is, there's a flaw to be had somewhere. Yo, Mo, my guy beat the Lakers, had Kenny Atkinson on their list this offseason and didn't hire him.
Dante, you feel my pain, buddy. You know where I'm coming from.
Dante was giving you crap about him and Cam Whitmore.
Dante has become my new arch enemy because he won't leave me alone about Cam Whitmore. He knows how much that pains me. He does. And by the way, I root for his Rockets, and all he does is taunt me. Love you, Dante.
No, absolutely. So, like I said, we're gonna get into our All NBA decade team from the 1990s. So I made a nice little. Let me pull it up real quick. I made a slide for. There it is. So here we go. All decade, 1990s team. So I was looking forward to this, Mo. And if you guys didn't catch last week, we did the 80s. And that was a ton of fun. And we knew that this was going to be an impossible task because there were some tough calls to be made. Now, why don't we get into it? Because, and I will say, I did my list positionless. So I didn't go with the usual, like, 2 guards, 2 forwards, and a center.
I did the same.
Without any further ado, let's talk 90s basketball. So, I made a little guidelines. The point of the exercise is to create 3 All-NBA teams from the 1990s. All defensive, the NBA teams will be positionless. A defensive player of the decade will be chosen from the guard, forward, and center position. I felt like if we did just player of the decade, it would just be straight centers because of how important rim protection is.
Isn't that crazy?
So we wanted to show love to somebody from every position. So, and then one player will be chosen as the MVP for this decade. I'm sure you guys are in suspense on who is the MVP of the 90s. Am I right? So, without any further ado, are you ready?
I like the wheel.
Thank you.
That's a great touch.
So, honorable mentions, by the way, shout out Mark Price. I forgot to put him on here. Dennis Rodman. I think Dennis Rodman's is a fantastic talent. He had 6, obviously had 6 or like 5 titles total, sorry. 3 with the Bulls, 2 with the Pistons. I do think that there were more talented players that played than him in the 90s. Mitch Richmond, got Penny Hardaway in the honorable mentions.
Mitch Richmond, wow, that's a good one.
Kevin Johnson, Tim Hardaway, Chris Mullin, and of course we put him on here out of respect for how his career ended, Drazen Petrovic, or I did. And by the way, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Obviously, our only guideline, keep it respectful. We can disagree, just make sure it's respectful. And let's have some fun.
Let me just throw one thing in there real quick that a lot of people probably don't know. Because we're talking about the decade, which would mean from 89 to, I guess, 90 or somewhere like that. Other than Michael Jordan, nobody scored more points from the guard position than Mitch Richmond. He's number 2 in the 90s, right behind Michael Jordan with over 16,000 points scored in that decade.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point it out because he's definitely one of those names that when you hear it, it isn't like a household name because he kind of gets lost in time. But Mitch Richmond, in terms of what he did in the 90s, he scored more points in that decade than Reggie Miller and Clyde Drexler.
No, absolutely. I say, Kenneth Wright, welcome. Thank you for tuning in. So, without any further ado, I will present mine, and Mo will tell you his if he agrees, disagrees, and we'll have a little fun.
Let's do it.
So, all NBA third team. I got Gary Payton as the first member of my all NBA third team. Elite two-way player, one of the greatest defenders that we've ever seen. This is how stacked the 90s is. In most other decades, Gary Payton would be a hell of a lot higher, but the 90s was just so embarrassingly rich with talent. I kind of ended up having to push him out to the third team. And then I got his running mate, Peyton and Kent, both on the third team.
The Rain Man. Nice.
I'd say one of the greatest duos of the 90s. Definitely up there with the guys like Stockton and Malone. I have Dikembe Mutombo.
Deke.
Rest in peace to Dikembe.
Yeah,
Double-double machine, over 3 blocks a game. Just an elite defensive anchor. Now, if you're reading the accolades, I'll slow down, so in case you wanted to read them, I only put them for the 90s. So I do know that he made 2 finals, one with the 76ers, one with the Brooklyn Nets, but that didn't happen in the 90s. So I didn't put it on there, but this is so that, and then the points and the stats, those are all just from the 90s too. Third team, I got Alonzo Mourning.
Okay.
As you can tell, I'm already having to make tough choices. He bounced between second team, third team. Overall, he ended up on the third team. Once again, just another almost impossible choice. And my last guy, Jimmy Butler, just heated up trade rumors with his post game. Oh, you'll have to let us know. I didn't catch what happened in the post game. And then third team, got Reggie Miller.
Reggie, okay.
So
I'm not mad.
Like I said, these were insanely tough, but that's my third team. So what do you think, Mo?
I think yours is a great third team. And the only where we're different at is I didn't have Gary Payton third team. I've got Tim Hardaway third team. Tim Hardaway, in terms of point guards, scored the most points in the decade of any point guard. I mean, Tim Hardaway was a dominant scorer. We're talking about the Tim Hardaway with the UTEP two-step crossover with the Warriors. But more importantly, when he came back from injury and he's a member of the Miami Heat, when he had to change his game, he still was an elite high-level scorer. So I've got Tim Hardaway on my third team, and instead of Zoe on third team, I've got Patrick Ewing on third team. But other than that, our third team is the same.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, at the end of the day, Jimmy Butler says he wants his joy back. He hope he gets it wherever he's playing next. He's
What?
happy off the court in Miami.
I don't want to. I don't want to interrupt. Did he say he wanted his joy back?
Joy back, yeah.
What is he, Shawn Michaels? Got to go find his smile.
He lost his smile.
He lost his smile. Come on.
Oh
Jimmy.
my goodness, that is wild.
How do you lose your smile? You plug ultralight. Come on, man.
Yeah, that's wild. Fire up the Jimmy Butler trade machine.
That's crazy.
Well,
You know what? That's a whole topic in itself. But yeah, okay.
I was gonna say, how about that, Mo? Well, next week we'll talk about some Jimmy Butler potential trade destinations.
No doubt.
I still watch that clip of Reggie in Madison Square. It's an all-timer. That's absolutely
Do you watch just when he makes the gesture, or do you watch the back and forth between him and Spike Lee? Because I love that.
The entire thing is absolutely fantastic.
It is. It is.
Now, all NBA second team, the top 10 are so hard to figure out because I feel like there's only a handful of guarantees. I feel like Clyde Drexler is so good as my first member of the all NBA second team. I feel like he should be on the first team with how good this man was. But he is on the second team. Now, I think this is the part of the list where some people are going to disagree with me, and that's okay.
It is.
Like I said, we love respectful debates. This one was the hardest, ladies and gentlemen. The Diesel. Now, I flipped him between first and second team, but overall, I think I did well on the first team. And the fact that I had to keep someone like Shaq away from the first team is absolutely wild. But it was tough. That was almost impossible. And by the way, it's wild how second team members and first team just have this long brick of accolades from the 90s.
It's kind of crazy.
I had to write a whole paragraph on Shaquille O'Neal here. Drexler is a guy that doesn't get much credit from younger fans. That's fair. I got Stockton on the second team as well.
Which, by the way,
no,
when you look. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, sorry. It's positionless, so I promise you, they're both gonna be there. Just which one's gonna be first team is the question.
No doubt. What people don't realize is because when you think of John Stockton, you think of the quintessential point guard, the floor general. But amongst point guards, I believe, because I was so curious when I saw this number, that amongst point guard, John Stockton was third in the decade in terms of points scored with over 11,000 points in the decade. You don't think of him as a prolific scorer, but what you forget about John Stockton is just as a shooter, John Stockton was a monster. And he was a monster on both ends of the floor. So I think it's well-deserved that you have him where you have him.
So, yeah, no, this is fair because I almost I agree with this, but also I'm curious, Fritz, I want you to see who I have on the first team and let me know who you would replace. So we'll get through the second team because I've been known to because I will switch my list if persuaded. I can be persuaded because I like listening to reason from intelligent sports fans. So, and you have already proven that you are a very intelligent guy. So
no doubt.
Stockton had a great mid-range pull-up.
He did.
Let's I got Pip on the second team also. This one was, like I said, this is a tough one. I feel like that we're getting into the impossible list here.
It is right because you went positionalist. And if you go positionless, then Pippen is right where he should be. If you go by position,
yeah,
it would completely change everything. He'd be first team.
And then the last member of the positionless all NBA teams, Patrick Ewing. So I thought that at the end of the day, Patrick was an incredible talent. I know some people see these accolades and be like, they're a little light. But the center position that he had to compete for the set accolades, absolutely insane. He was just an incredible talent who really just had to put up with absolute insane talent at that position.
And don't forget, when you think about the great players and their playoff runs and what they did or didn't do, Patrick Ewing didn't have a perennial all-star as his sidekick. He never had a star like John Starks is an overachiever. He worked himself into being a starter, but he made one all-star team. He wasn't a star, he wasn't a perennial star. Like if Patrick Ewing could have had a second guy that you could book for 20 plus a night on a consistent basis, it literally could have changed the way we look at him in the overall scope of the NBA. I think that gets lost. Like you go back and look at those Knicks team, they were literally built to be physical, to be defensive, but they were built around one great offensive player. And that's remember, Pat Riley did that formula twice. He did it in New York, and then he replicated the same thing again in Miami with Alonzo Mourning.
Pippen on the second team, I'd argue Pippen being on the second team, he should be on the first team. If you expand in the 90s,
if you're going by position, he'd be number one. But remember, what gets lost by a lot of NBA fans is the very best. I'm talking about the very best players, the guys that were the franchise players for their teams. The very best players in the 90s, most of them, they played the 4, they played the 5.
Yeah.
And so while I know you can tell me that Scottie Pippen is a better defender and he's more agile and a lot of these things, I don't think he had a greater impact than a Karl Malone or Charles Barkley, who were their franchise player. Like he had the benefit of playing beside a certain guy. I'm just saying.
So, like I said, I'm curious what you think about, because I'm sure you guys can guess the first team, but I'll still go through it. And I would love to who would you take out? Because you're saying Pippen. Fritz says Shaq should be first team.
I can't do that. I can't.
So
I can't. My I won't let my fandom rule out what I know better than. I can't put Shaq ahead of Olajuwon because Olajuwon was better than him.
I think this. Here's the tough. There's a couple of ones where I considered putting Shaq over. So Shaq or the round mound of rebound, Charles Barkley.
That would be the debate. Are you moving out Barkley or are you moving out Malone to start Shaq? I'm not moving out neither one of them. Here's the thing about Shaq too: is as dominant as his numbers were in the 90s, I would make an argument the best version of Shaq kind of hit like 2000.
No, absolutely. I got Hakeem, got Karl Malone, I got the Admiral, David Robinson, and hey guys, can you believe it? Michael Jordan's on the first team.
What is he doing on there?
So let's see. We got Barkley's indisputable. Barkley needs to be dropped for Karl Malone. We got Barkley's indisputable, and Barkley needs to be dropped for Pippen. And he said, okay, so you would put in Shaq for Karl Malone. Okay.
So wait a minute. Who would replace?
So Kenneth goes, Barkley needs to be dropped for Pippen.
Okay.
Fritz says I would take out Karl Malone for Shaq. And
yeah, I'm not. Okay.
Barkley is indisputable.
Yeah, well, this is what I love about this kind of conversation, that you guys all have strong opinions, and the cool thing is we're gonna agree on a lot of things, but we'll disagree on some things. But we're doing it in a really good, respectful way. Look, I have no problem if you want to move. Because by the way, Brett and my first team are almost identical. I have no problem if you want to move out Barkley for Shaquille O'Neal. That's not like a crazy take. Or you can move out Karl Malone for Shaquille. The only thing that I would say about Karl Malone is it would be hard to move him out, because as dominant as Barkley was in the 90s, Malone was actually a little bit more dominant. Malone won 2 MVPs. Malone went to 2 finals. You can say, well, Barkley lost to Jordan. Ding, ding. Malone did that twice in a row. I think Charles Barkley, they have unique skill sets because Barkley could handle the ball in a way that Malone couldn't. But in terms of their production, Karl Malone was just as productive. And in terms of what they did on the other side of the ball, Karl Malone was a much better defender. It's not even close. Karl Malone made all defensive team multiple times. Charles Barkley never made all defensive team because he didn't play defense.
Yeah, that would have been the switch, because I debated that right up until the start of the show. Charles Barkley or Shaq for the first team, and I went with Charles Barkley because I think it was literally like pulling hairs. So if you went Shaq, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I am.
I agree with either one, but I give the slight edge to the round mound of rebound. Shaq's, I more think of Shaq because he started really just being. I think of Shaq almost as like the 2000s, and I think he could have made this list, but once again, the 90s is just such a tough big man list to crack.
You know what though? The amazing thing is, we have Shaq in the 90s, but it wouldn't shock me if he made one of the 2000s teams, right? Like the guy only three-peated in the 2000s. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He only three-peated. He only won 3 finals MVP. Like, yes, spoiler alert, Shaq's going to be on one of those all-time teams in the 2000s. But yeah, I'm with you, Brett. Anybody that has Shaq moving out Barkley or Malone, I don't think that's a harsh take at all. The only place where I give no wiggle room is Shaquille can move out a lot of people. He's not moving out Olajuwon.
No, that's fair. Spoiler alert. I'm pretty sure you can guess which team Shaquille O'Neal is going to be on next week when we do the 2000s.
That's right. That purple and gold, baby.
Oh yeah, the Diesel. But defensive players of the day. Barkley's probably the second most talented after Jordan, but he was just lazy on defense.
I don't argue that.
Hey, I appreciate it, Kenneth. Thank you. Yeah. Hey, that's fair. It's so tough when it comes to, like, with Pippen. I wanted to put him first team. Like, genuinely, I think there's 7 guys who could have made the first team. If I'm adding, Shaq, Scottie Pippen, and like I think those 2 could have made it too. So having to cut 2 of them, it's like
it is tough.
I lose either way. I win and I lose. You just have to kind of pick a battle.
Brett, just for the record, the same way there's no such thing as a perfect player, there's no such thing as a perfect team, right? Like if we let our chat do their team, which by the way, chat, I would love to see your all NBA teams, first, second, and third teams of the 90s, because I'm sure I will respect all you guys' selections. We might not agree on everything, but this is a pretty smart chat, so I'm sure you guys will come up with some really nice squads.
No, absolutely. And of course, we did the defensive player of the decade, like we said. Now, this one, see, I think 2 of the 3 selections were easy. I got Gary Payton at point. I got Hakeem at center. This was almost impossible because he has a teammate who was equally as elite on defense.
Sure.
Scottie Pippen or Dennis Rodman?
That's tough.
Pitt. I went with Pitt.
So let me ask you this, because I'm sure the chat might be wondering too. Did you go with Pip because obviously they became teammates, but even when they were teammates, Pippen was the better defender when they were teammates. Like, I think I'm not sure how the chat feels about this, but that version of Rodman that was on the Bulls, he wasn't a perimeter defender. That's not Dennis Rodman from Detroit guarding all 5 positions. The Dennis Rodman on Chicago, he guarded bigs. He played more in the post. He didn't play in space because he didn't have the lateral quickness to play in space anymore. And so Scottie was a better defender. You and I had this talk. And I thought it's weird to say one guy is better than the guy who won DPOY twice. That's what makes it a tough choice. If somebody in the chat tells me I would take Rodman over Pippen in the overall scheme, I would probably agree with you. But if we're just talking about just the 90s, Pippen was a greater defender for a longer period of time. By the way, even when they were beating Utah in the finals, go back and watch that series. Dennis Rodman was a part-time player. And he was a part-time player because he didn't make Karl Malone work on defense. And the thing that Dennis Rodman was the best at, that was dominant at, was rebounding. The only problem was he was going up against, at the time, the greatest power forward in the game, and Karl Malone reminded him there's a 40-pound difference between the two of us. Dennis Rodman didn't average 12, 15 rebounds a game in either one of those series. In both of those series, he averaged single-digit rebounds, like 7 or 8 rebounds a game. Remember, they had to put in Bison Daly because Bison Daly could score. He made Karl Malone work. So Pippen was a better defender for a longer period of time, in my opinion.
So for this one, it's 1 guard, 1 forward, 1 center.
Correct.
And I agree with, right? And that's kind of where it is. I think if we were doing the best one-on-one defenders, man defense, I'd probably give it to Rodman. But I think Pippen overall was a better team defender than Rodman.
Right. But you wouldn't give it to Rodman because of what he did with the Bulls. You would have given him Rodman with the Pistons. Right?
No, like his early decade work.
Right. Right. That's what I'm talking about. The best version of Rodman. If we did it this way, chat, by the way, I'm with y'all, chat, by the way. If you said the best version of Pippen on defense versus the best version of Rodman, I'm taking Rodman.
Yeah, and absolutely. And that, kind of what you mentioned too, what kind of pushed me towards Scotty is towards the end of the 90s, you see it. Rodman's like minutes in the playoffs start dropping. You know, he's getting older. He can't do anything about that. I think he did it for longer throughout the decade. And then as the decade wore on, he was just guarding harder assignments longer into games. Yeah. So overall, I think I made the right choice here with Pippen, but it came down to Pippen or Rodman, and that was not easy.
Guys, it's so close, but you just remember that Pacers team and how good and how deep they are. Phil Jackson makes one adjustment. He puts Scottie Pippen on Mark Jackson, who's like the head of the snake, and that one move completely disrupted Indiana's offense, which is weird to say because even though that move worked, it was still a 7-game series.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If I had to pick runner-ups, which I'm kind of doing off the dome, so let me guys know if I missed somebody. Second best guard defender in the 90s.
Alvin Robertson. Oh, sorry.
I mean, probably just straight up be MJ, right?
I think it would be. I would say I would have MJ behind Peyton, and then I might put Dumars behind MJ, right?
Oh, fair enough. And if I had to do a runner-off off the dome for Hakeem, give me, I'd probably just go with keep it simple. Give me Dikembe Mutombo. And I think that one, or if I had to pick my other debate I was having, the Admiral David Robinson.
Yes.
It depends on what you want. I think Dikembe's just a more imposing rim protector, but David Robinson's just better at guarding in space.
Right. David Robinson was a freakish athlete.
I think I'd probably actually go David Robinson. I think Dikembe's better rim protection, but I think Admiral just gives you a little more all around.
Yeah. Look, like I said, it's tough, guys, when you come up with these squads. But yeah. I love Elijah. By the way, chat, tell me if we're wrong. Because the fact that Brett and I, we have Olajuwon on the 80s team and he's on the 90s team. We have this debate about should he be a top 10 player. I already have him in my top 10. I don't know where the chat has Hakeem Olajuwon all time, but he's in my top 10.
No, that's fair enough. Who was the MVP of the 90s? I just put down here. I'm sure you know.
Olajuwon.
Yeah, it's Horace Grant, guys.
Right. Surprising it's Horace Grant's teammate. Right. Yeah. This one right here might have been the easiest one. Like, I think when we go through the decades, Michael Jordan being the MVP of the 90s is going to be the easiest one. Because
that guy. I just got his poster.
That is a poster. Dope.
Yeah.
What's up?
Yeah, shout out to my boy Yandel from work. He gave it to me as a Secret Santa gift for Christmas. But absolutely, this is facts right here. Hakeem was a good scorer. He was a great scorer in isolation. Just generational defender, top 2 of all time. And the only reason I say top 2 is I see a lot of people, they'll make the argument for Bill Russell.
Yeah.
So
and I can't argue with that, right? You can't argue with that.
I think that's a valid argument. If you really look into 60s ball, Bill Russell was just an absolute insane defender. But if you tell me that Hakeem Olajuwon's the greatest defender of all time, I'm not going to disagree with you.
I'm not going to call you crazy. And if somebody wants to point out, well, Mutombo won 4 DPOYs and Ben Wallace won 4 DPOYs, which, by the way, those I think they earned those the same way Rudy Gobert earned his. Those accolades matter. Do I think any of those 3 guys are better defenders than Hakeem Olajuwon? Nope.
Like, we tried to do a perfect balance of accolades, but also like understanding how the accolades were earned.
Correct.
And like DPOY, for example, right? Like, I don't necessarily judge who's the better by DPOY because there's a guy, his name is Tim Duncan, who has 0 DPOYs in 15 years.
Facts.
Even though I think most would agree, he's a top 4 defender of all time? Top 5 at worst?
Top 5 at worst.
Like, you have a top 5 defender of all time who never won a DPOY. And I think that's why it's so important to just contextualize these awards.
By the way, so if I know they do that, we're done with the 90s. If I have any gripe about the 90s when you look back on it, it was that the defensive player of the year usually was a big who either led the league in blocks or had the most total blocks. And I'm not saying that wasn't a great player or a great defender, but the game was different. Like, the only guy that we talk, when we talk about DPOYs and he's a big, maybe there's one other guy, but the only guy that can play in today's game and play in space and not be a liability, it would be Olajuwon. Maybe Ben Wallace, because Ben Wallace, I thought he had the lateral quickness to play in space, but as great as Mutombo was, I think he would have trouble in today's NBA, as would a lot of the guys that their default was to sink back into the paint. They would get annihilated in today's NBA.
Yeah, and that's kind of my point too. For it's like LeBron never won a DPOY, but if I ask you who's a better defender between like LeBron or Marcus Smart, I promise you'll say LeBron. And if you don't say LeBron, you didn't watch peak LeBron.
Yeah, or look, Scottie Pippen never won DPOY.
Right, and if
right.
Yeah, right. And if I start going through the DPOY winners, you're going to pick Scotty over like half of them at least.
Facts.
And then I had a thank you at the end of this. But that was the last slide. So, but that was my all NBA team. But I think that's what a lot of people just fail to realize with these awards. Just you have to contextualize them because one guy has an award and the other doesn't make them the better player. Because a lot of these awards are just, media driven, like narrative related.
No, I agree. We could make a case, and I think we could have this conversation. You know what? I just gave us another topic for next week. Like, Steph is the first unanimous winner of the MVP, right? The first unanimous. And by the way, I'm not saying he didn't. This isn't an argument against Steph, but I do want to point out something that it would be basic knowledge to most people. Even though he won the MVP, and I thought he should have won it, nobody thought Steph was better than LeBron, right? Like we knew he deserved to win it, but we weren't making the argument that Steph Curry is better than LeBron James, right? We know he's not a better basketball player. You know what I'm saying? Like if we go through all the years, we could do that too. We can make that a topic. All right. Well, the year that Barkley won the MVP, was he the best player in basketball? No, but he won the MVP. He had a great year. He was the best player on the team with the best record. And again, I'm not. This is not me killing those guys. It's me pointing out what you pointed out. You have to take those accolades into the context. Very few guys get to compete versus the guy that won the MVP, and you're thinking I'm better than him. Well, guess what? LeBron got to do that. Steph was unanimous MVP. They met in the finals. LeBron came back, and his team, came back from 3-1, and his team won. He's Finals MVP. Very few times you get to do that. Now I know Jordan got to do it a couple of times, but again, I think the MVP that Steph won is deserved, but it's very unique that we want to give these accolades out. And like I love that you pointed out that a lot of times they're narrative driven. They are, but even the media, who by the way loves Steph, and I do too. What's not to like about Steph Curry? They know that the best version of Steph is not equal to the best version of LeBron.
If we do that topic, no, I'm just going to annoy people by going, "Hey, was Steve Nash the best player in the NBA?" Yes.
Now, Brett, you know how I feel about the Steve Nash conversation, and it's not pertaining to Kobe, it's pertaining to Shaq. Anybody out there that's listening or checking out the show, and you're a Miami Heat fan, I think was it Shaq's first year with the Heat?
Yeah, he was runner-up in 04, 05.
Right, and he swears he should, and because he swears it, in Miami Heat fans are like, well, Shaquille O'Neal, he didn't average 28 points a game. He didn't average 14 or 15 rebounds. I believe that first year in Miami, he averaged like 22 or 23 points a game and 9 rebounds, which are good numbers. They're good numbers. But if you look at in context what Steve Nash did for his team, Steve Nash should have been MVP. I think Kobe had a gripe. Shaq does not have a gripe. He doesn't.
I think with Steve Nash, too many people just look at like, oh, he averaged like 15 and 11. But the real like reason that you see Steve Nash won MVP and we can say it's deserved, it's the overall impact on the team, right? It's okay, you averaged 15 and 11, but this Suns team just had, I think it was like, what was it, like a 15-game improvement or 20 from the year prior and jumped to like the best offense in the league for 8 straight years under Steve Nash. And
right.
The one year that they didn't finish first, they were the second best offense in the league. And that's Amari Stoudemire missing the entire season almost for Lindsey Hunter and Boris Diaw.
By the way, Amari Stoudemire, borderline superstar player, gone for the year. Like literally early in the season. And what does Steve Nash do? He turns Boris Diaw into a double-double guy. Boris Diaw had been living on the Atlanta Hawks bench forever, hadn't done nothing. He was a throwaway player in that trade. And suddenly, because by circumstance, Amari gets hurt. By the way, Steve Nash, he might be the king of getting people paid. He got Boris Diaw paid. He got Raja Bell paid. He got Joe Johnson paid on his way out. He got Sean Marion paid. He got Amari paid. He got everybody paid.
Yeah, no, Prima, Steve Nash could just make everybody look good on offense. When I say that, when it comes to just offensive engines and just running a complete offense in general, like I feel like people think I'm crazy when I say Steve Nash probably just a top 10 offensive engine of all time in terms of just producing high overall team offenses. It's something, but he produces offenses at best offenses in the league for 8 years straight. Like
and look we lost to. Like, because you know we point out he didn't win no titles. You're right. You can say that. Who did he lose to? He lost to Tim Duncan Spurs. Who did he lose to? He lost to Kobe's Lakers. Like, obviously, I'm just saying that every great player not going to have a championship. It's just facts. Not going to have a championship.
Yeah. No, that's 100% fair. That might be another fun one too, Mode. 10 greatest offensive players of all time. Just impacting overall team offensive players.
Of all time?
Ooh.
10 greatest offensive player. That's a good one. You know what? You already brought up a guy that's going to be on the list. I'll give you another guy because I don't think it's a spoiler. I don't know where we would rank him, but he's going to be ranked high. It would be James Harden.
I'd say I can give you another 4 off the dome. Obviously, we have Magic Johnson. I don't think that would shock anybody.
That's another good one. Yeah.
LeBron James. I don't think
that's
that
another.
Shock anybody.
That's not a shocker, right? Right.
We said Steve Nash. James Harden was historic with those Rockets. Another one, Nikola Jokic.
I'm not arguing. Keep going. You're on a roll. You're on a roll.
Overall, I think I think those 5 are a good ones to base it off of. And, this is kind of thinking off the top of my head. There's probably some I'm not thinking of.
For sure.
But I definitely think that Jokic has already earned a place. And it's easily one of the 10 greatest offensive engines in history. And I think he's already earned a place in the top 5. Well, for the work he's done, we can crap all we want on him defensively. And, it's merited to an extent. But what he does offensively, I think we as basketball fans, we just got to appreciate it because that's not something that comes around every day. What him and even guy like Luka are doing offensively, that's rare. So I hate it. I actually hate it that people will be like, well, let's nitpick this part of their game. Let's nitpick that. Like, just appreciate them while they're here.
And,
You're not going to see Nikola Jokic again. Are you going to see another Luka Doncic again? Probably not.
Not anytime soon. Not anytime. Look, and look, I get it that you can point flaws in their games, but to be fair, most great offensive players aren't great two-way players. Like Steph competes, but he's not a great defender. James Harden wasn't a great defender. Steve Nash not a great. Like a lot of great offensive players, they wasn't clamping down on defense. So I don't know why we picked this particular era where Luka can't guard no. Well, you're asking Luka plays point or he plays the 2. You're asking him to play to guard arguably the 2 hardest positions in the NBA to guard, and he's not naturally quick of foot. So if I wanted to nitpick about Luka's game, I'll do it this way. I think Luka offensively, in terms of what he can do and how he can generate numbers, is amazing. I don't know if Luka has those winning intangibles the way Joker does. Because people are going to say, like, Luka, it's only a matter of time before Luka wins the title. I don't know that to be true at all. I don't know if Luka ever wins a title as the best player. He could not. Obviously, he's still young. What is he? 24? He's 24. He might eventually leave the Mavericks, team up with somebody else, and win a title that way. But let me rephrase that. As a member of the Mavericks franchise, I don't think Luka's going to win a title. You can call that a hot take. I don't think it's a hot take at all. I think it's kind of just a smart take.
And then the last one before we get up on out here, Mo. I do want to point out too, because I saw a post. It was who's easier to build around, Luka Doncic or Jason Tatum. And I do want to point this out, Mo. I think people mistaken who's better and who's easier to build around. Those are 2 different things. So
I think Tatum's easier to build around.
Right. I think Luka overall is a better basketball player than Tatum. I think his offense is just so insane that I think it puts him over Tatum. But Tatum is just easier to build around. I'll give you another example, Mo.
I like that.
Who's better, prime Russell Westbrook or prime Drew Holiday?
Come on, man.
It's prime Russ.
It's prime.
But
it's
who's
prime Russ.
But who's easier to build around?
Right. But
Drew.
see, I love that you said that. That kind of literally comes 360 with the conversation that you and I were having before we went on the air. What was it? It was something about shooting guards. But the point was, there are guys who are more prolific, but there are other guys that are better fits. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
there are some players that can fit in any system, and there are other guys who can only fit in a certain system. Matter of fact, I remember now, somebody was telling me how much better Dominique Wilkins was than Chris Mullin. And they were saying, well, he made 9 All-Star teams and 7 All-NBA teams. And I was like, I fully understand that. And he was a much more prolific scorer. But I was like, let's start with the things they have in common. Neither one of them were great defenders. As athletic and gifted as Dominique was physically, he couldn't guard anybody. He was a terrible defender. He was a more prolific scorer, but Chris Mullin is a better shooter. Chris Mullin was a better passer. The only thing Dominique did was he scored more, but he scored more because he shot more. Dominique averaged 22, 23 shots a game for 7 or 8 seasons. I don't think Chris Mullin ever took more than 20 shots his entire career. If you're asking me who's more prolific, it's Dominique. If you're asking me if I'm drafting them, who am I taking? It's Chris Mullin. He's the better player.
Right. Like certain guys' play styles, like when we're talking about like Neek, like Russ, their play style is built to be the guy. But the reality is, if Russ is your number one option, for example, as much as I respect him, we've already seen it. You're not winning a title. It's a difficult play style to build around.
It
whereas
is.
someone like Drew Holiday, Chris Mullin, you can slot those guys in next to other stars and superstars, and they complement them. So overall, like, I think that's just kind of what I want to say is I want people to understand better and easier to build around. Let's stop treating them like the same thing because they are not the same thing at all.
I like that a lot, by the way. That actually could take us back to the whole where we started at. We can go all the way back to what's going on in Sacramento. We can go all the way back to that. I'm a big De'Aaron Fox fan, but I don't think he's easy to build around because of his playing style.
I think Fox can be the best offensive player on a championship team. But
agreed, but
I don't think overall player.
That's all I'm saying. I don't think he can be your best player. That's all I'm saying. And people were like, "Oh, you hating?" No, I'm a big fan of his. But if he's the guy, meaning that he is out and out your best player, I just think there's a different ceiling of success. By the way, I've come up with a name of this. And somebody got mad because they thought I was banging on Joe Johnson because I call it the Joe Johnson theory. But that's what it is. It's the Joe Johnson. It is the Joe Johnson theory. If Joe Johnson, in his prime when he was with Atlanta, was not the man in Atlanta, but he was the number 2 to LeBron or the number 2 to KD. My point is, if he were the number 2 to a better player, Joe Johnson would have played in the finals. He would have. Mm-hmm. But as the man, I'm not saying he wasn't good as the man, but he's not good enough to take you to a finals. If you're a basketball historian, what is the Joe Johnson Hawks' greatest claim to fame?
The Celtics at 7?
That's it. They took the Celtics to 7 in a first-round series. That is their greatest claim to fame. That says it all.
No, absolutely. Before we get on out of here, I would definitely want to thank everybody new that tuned in. Shout out to Fritz for subscribing.
No doubt.
And, Kenneth, thank you for tuning in as well. We love hearing from everybody.
Kyle, Aaron,
Young Gory.
Thank all you guys.
Like I said, we're just two guys that love to chop it up and talk hoops, current and historical. So we're here every Thursday. So, anything you want to add, Mo?
No, I just really appreciate the chat for being so lively, so smart. And so knowledgeable. Thank you guys so much for participating and joining Brett and I. We appreciate the support so much.
And you can catch us here next Thursday. We're going to do the 2000s. We're going to be talking Jimmy Butler trades. Kyle already said he's here for it. Anything for the Heat's downfall. I respect the hate. I respect it, Kyle. And then earlier than that, you can catch Mo and I, if you're a professional wrestling fan, next Monday. We're doing a watch along of the first ever WWE Raw on Netflix.
Oh, can't wait.
So definitely, hopefully we'll see you again next week. So thanks again and hope everybody has a great night.
Thank you for tuning in to the And One podcast. If you like our content, you can find more on the Wire to Wire Podcast Network on YouTube, Facebook, and Spotify. Want more And One? Find it on Wire to Wire. Like and share our Facebook page and join the And One Discord. Grab the link to join from our Facebook. Thank you for tuning in and have a wonderful day.